Reading today, Jesse does have three favorite parts of the Bible, so we're in Mark at that, which happens to be one of my favorites when I came in too. And so I did that sermon up in Corning, and they loved that three parts of the Bible and how that mixed at the end. They really found that interesting. So here we are reading Mark today. This is chapter 8, 27 through 38 in the New Revised Standard Version. Jesus went on with his disciples to the village of Caesarea Philippi. And on the way he asked his disciples, "Who do the people say that I am?" And they answered him, "John the Baptist, and others Elijah, still others one of the prophets." He asked them, "But who do you say that I am?" Peter answered him, "You are the Messiah." And he sternly ordered them not to tell anyone about him. Then he began to teach them that the Son of God must undergo great suffering, be rejected by the elders, the chief priests, and the scribes, and be killed, and after 3 days rise again. He said all this quite openly. And Peter took him to a side and began to rebuke him. But turning and looking at his disciples, he rebuked Peter, saying, "Get behind me, Satan, for you are setting your mind not on divine things, but on human things." He called the crowd with his disciples, and he said to them, "If any want to become my followers, let them deny themselves and take up their cross and follow me. For those who want to save their life will lose it, and those who want to lose their life for my sake and the sake of the gospel will save it. For what will it profit them to gain the world and forfeit their life? Indeed, what can they give in return for their life? Those who are ashamed of me and my words in this adulterous and sinful generation, of them the Son of God will be ashamed when he comes in glory of his Father with the holy angels." May God add his understanding to these words.
Thank you, Kevin. I appreciate that very much. So Jesus is one of those historical figures that often gets quoted by people who aren't necessarily religious. There are a lot of Jesus sayings out there that have kind of taken a life of their own in our common speech, probably because they're wise. They're good, wise sayings, and they have good practical application to everyday things. So, when you think about it, think of all the Jesus sayings that we take for granted but other people use, like turn the other cheek, or do unto others, or talking about casting your pearls to the swine, or hiding your light under a bushel, or "O ye of little faith," render unto Caesar that which is Caesar's. You are the salt of the earth. Don't let your right hand know what your left hand is doing. Going the extra mile, building your house on solid rock instead of sand. All of these things are memorable sayings that Jesus said because he had a talent for painting these vivid images that take root in people's minds, and then all of a sudden they just come out of nowhere when they're appropriate. So here's a scenario for you. You are driving to an event, and you don't have much wiggle room time-wise. You're not entirely sure how to get there, and you realize that you left your phone on your nightstand at home. That means no Siri and no Google Maps to help you out. And your passenger, who also, for the sake of the story, doesn't have a phone either, says, "Oh my gosh, what are we going to do? We're not going to make it on time, and you don't even know where we're going." And you turn around and say, Think of a Jesus saying. Pardon? Oh, ye of little faith. Do it, Kevin, say it. Either of those are acceptable answers. I was wondering who was going to go there, and I should have known it was you, Kevin. That's good. I was thinking, oh, ye of little faith. That's a Jesus quote, again, that not everybody knows is a Jesus quote. And when it comes to some of our little wisdom sayings, we don't always think about the source of the quote. You say it because it's just another word of wisdom that you have heard from someone else who heard it from someone else, and so on and so forth. What's troublesome is when these wise little quotes of Jesus are used outside their original context. So our scripture today contains a classic example of a Jesus quote that is often used out of context. How many times do you hear people talking about the cross that they must bear? Right? Here in verse 34, Jesus said, "If any want to become my followers, let them deny themselves, take up your cross, and follow me." But this idea of bearing your cross has kind of taken on a life of its own in our culture, because you'll hear people using it for everything, allergies, rash, pimples, having to sit next to weird Uncle Harry at the Thanksgiving dinner table, harsh work environment, arthritis, marriage breakdowns, unemployment, mortgages, you name it. The list is endless. This phrase has come to mean that you have to learn to live with something that life throws at you, that makes things harder than they might otherwise be. So, keep a stiff upper lip, get on with your life as best as you can, lay hold of that old Greek stoicism and just buck up, little camper, because you just need to keep on making lemonade out of lemons. Now, there is no question that bad things do happen to good people, because, like you say, Kevin, if you've come to this church at all in, the last year or two, maybe the last week or two, you know that Job is one of my favorite Old Testament books. And as I've said before, the book of Job can be summed up in 2 words: stuff happens. Let me be clear that this bear my cross wisdom does not apply to situations like domestic violence or anything that puts your life at risk. You most certainly do not have to put up with that. But either way, if we read some sort of put up or shut up idea into what Jesus is saying in today's passage, we're going to miss the point. And in this context, Jesus was talking about what it meant to be his followers. And so take up your cross and follow me was specifically addressing our willingness to face the consequences of following Jesus. So, arthritis is not a consequence of following Jesus, right? I'm not sure what is a consequence of, maybe, genetic coding, whatever, but if you've got it, you learn to adapt and you learn to live with it the best that you can. In the same way, mortgage payments are not a result of following Jesus. They are a consequence of choosing to purchase your own house. If you make that choice, you'll have to bear the burden of paying the mortgage, whether you follow Jesus or not. So, here's another one: unemployment. Unemployment is usually not a consequence of following Jesus. It is a consequence of living somewhere where there are more people than there are jobs. And unless you live in a society that allows religious discrimination in the workplace, the decision to follow Jesus won't, or at least it shouldn't, have an impact on your employment. These sorts of things are facts of life for everyone, not just those who choose to follow Jesus. They are the price of being a human being, not a Christian. Now, this is not meant to in any way downplay the impact that such things have on people. It's simply to say that such difficulties and tragedies affect everyone, not just Christians. They are real, they are important, but they are not what Jesus was talking about here. So, what was he talking about? Okay. For Jesus, taking up his cross literally meant his willingness to die for what he was committed to. When he arrived in Jerusalem, the corrupt religious leaders and the corrupt national leaders gave him a simple choice. You either back down or we will have you killed. Jesus either had to walk away from the things that he had been saying and doing to stop rocking the boat, or he had to hold his ground and face the ultimate price. He had just explained this to his disciples when he followed it up with, "Those who want to be my followers must deny themselves, take up their cross, and follow me." He's saying that if you choose to take your stand with him, you'll have to be willing to deal with the consequences. You can't choose to follow Jesus and keep your head down. When Jesus walks out into the open to protest about the way things are, you can either look on from the distance or you can come up close and follow him. And when Jesus said that if you want to be his followers, you've got to deny yourself, he's saying that you've got to hand over the keys, right? You don't tag along at a distance and pick and choose about when you're going to be associated with Jesus and when you're not. Denying yourself means relinquishing the right to determine which issues you're going to stand with Jesus on and which issues you're going to keep quiet about. Denying yourself means that every time the way of Jesus comes into conflict with the ways of the world around you, you will not make the decision based on what is best for you. You will simply follow Jesus, taking up your cross and dealing with those consequences. And if there is any doubt about what Jesus was really saying, he lays it all out at the end of the passage. He's like, listen, if you're too embarrassed to be associated with me when my ways are despised or ridiculed, don't expect me to welcome you with open arms when it's convenient for you. This is similar to some of the examples that we were rejecting before, because some of them are consequences of choices. See, if you choose not to continue making your mortgage payments, don't expect the bank to be recognizing you as the owner of the house, right? You can't have the benefits of the arrangement, the house, without the costs. It's a whole package deal. You make the choice. You deal with the consequences, all of them. Now understand that the consequences of following Jesus aren't going to be the same for everyone. Because during certain times and places in history, following Jesus has carried the death penalty. And in these times and places, taking up your cross has literally meant signing your own death warrant. Here and now, Christianity is not likely to become illegal in the foreseeable future, but it's also not likely to become the way most people choose to live. Now, if you choose to follow Jesus, you have to accept that it's not going to endear you to a lot of the people, or maybe even most of the people that you have to deal with. The closer you follow Jesus, the more consequences you're going to discover. And each time a new consequence comes along, the more you'll discover times when it's either follow Jesus or give up following Jesus completely. And, I guess there is a third option, and that's you could sort of play at being a Christian, but it seems like what Jesus is saying here is that this option is really just a disguised version of don't follow Jesus at all. Okay, what's the good news, Jesse? I mean, we've heard that you get kind of cranky when you don't feel good, but good Lord, it sounds like you've been kind of beaten up on us here. Okay, here's the good news. Jesus does include the promise of resurrection. He tells Peter, the Son of Man must undergo great suffering and be rejected by the elders, the chief priests, the scribes, and be killed. And after 3 days, rise again. And that promise of resurrection contains promise for all those other things that we've mistaken as crosses. For those who struggle with sickness and chronic pain, there is promise of a day when all will be healed, when all will be whole. For those struggling with conflict and breakdown, there is the promise of a day of reconciliation, a day of communion. For those who are exploited or discarded, there is the promise of a day of justice. They may not be crosses, but Jesus takes them seriously and longs to bring us freedom and wholeness. The promise is awesome, but the road between here and there is traveled by those who are willing to accept the consequences that await along the way. Those who are willing to take up their crosses and follow Jesus.